Throw everyone out. The words echoed through the private trauma room like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Monitors continued their steady rhythm. IV pumps hummed softly. Outside the reinforced glass doors, armed security guards instinctively reached for their weapons. Inside, 6 of New York's finest trauma surgeons stared at the man lying on the operating table. Luca Romano, 41 years old. The man newspapers called a billionaire shipping magnate. The man federal investigators quietly called untouchable. The man every criminal organization east of Chicago feared. A single bullet had entered just below his left shoulder less than 20 minutes earlier. Blood soaked the white sheets beneath him. His breathing was shallow, but his steel-gray eyes remained terrifyingly calm. Dr. Ethan Mercer, chief of trauma surgery at St. Gabriel Medical Center, stepped closer. "Mr. Romano," he said firmly, "you need emergency surgery now." Luca ignored him. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the hallway beyond the open door. His gaze rested on an elderly man pushing a worn cleaning cart. The old janitor paused for only a second before continuing to wipe a bloodstain from the polished floor. Most people wouldn't have noticed him. Luca did. He lifted one trembling finger. Him. The room fell silent. "I trust him." Dr. Mercer frowned. "Who?" "The janitor." Several nurses exchanged confused glances. One young resident almost laughed before catching herself. The security chief leaned closer. "Sir, that's only a maintenance worker." Luca never looked away from the old man. "Bring him here." No one moved. Finally, one of Luca's bodyguards opened the hallway door. "Sir, the boss wants to see you." The old janitor looked up slowly. His face showed no surprise. No fear. Only quiet curiosity. He parked his cleaning cart beside the wall and walked into the trauma room with slow, measured steps. His uniform was faded. The hospital logo had almost disappeared after years of washing. Gray hair framed a weathered face, marked by countless sleepless nights. Deep scars crossed the backs of both hands. Hands that looked far too steady for a 70-year-old janitor. Dr. Mercer crossed his arms. "I'm sorry, but this is a restricted medical area." Before he could continue, Luca spoke again. "Everyone, out." The doctor blinked. "What?" I said. Luca coughed, blood staining his lips. "Everyone except him." For several long seconds, nobody dared speak. Finally, Dr. Mercer looked toward Luca's head of security. "This is absurd. It could cost him his life." The security chief hesitated. Everyone inside that room knew one thing. No one argued with Luca Romano. Not if they wanted to keep breathing. One by one, the doctors reluctantly stepped into the hallway. The heavy doors closed behind them. Only Luca and the old janitor remained. No cameras, no witnesses. No one ever discovered what was said during the next 3 minutes. But when the doors finally opened, Luca's expression had completely changed. For the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss looked relieved, and the old janitor simply nodded once before quietly returning to his cleaning cart, as though nothing unusual had happened. 3 days earlier, rain hammered the streets of Manhattan before sunrise. At exactly 4:45 a.m., Samuel Hayes unlocked the employee entrance of St. Gabriel Medical Center. No one greeted him. No one ever did. For 12 years, Samuel had arrived before nearly everyone else. By the time surgeons walked through the front doors carrying expensive coffee, every hallway already shined beneath the fluorescent lights. They never wondered who cleaned them. To most employees, Samuel wasn't a person. He was simply part of the building. Like the elevators, like the lights, like the walls. Every morning followed the same quiet routine. Clock in, fill 2 buckets, replace the cleaning chemicals, inspect the basement corridors, check the emergency exits, then begin the long walk through 7 hospital floors before sunrise. The younger janitors often joked that Samuel cleaned the hospital as if he were inspecting a military base. He never laughed. Every door mattered. Every pipe mattered. Every strange sound mattered. He noticed things other people ignored. A loose ceiling panel, a leaking oxygen valve, a cracked electrical conduit, a security camera pointed 2 degrees too far left. Tiny details. Details that had kept people alive long before anyone handed him a mop. Around 6 that morning, Samuel entered the trauma wing. Dr. Ethan Mercer rushed past him while reading a patient's chart. Their shoulders almost collided. Without looking up, Mercer snapped. "Watch where you're standing." Samuel quietly stepped aside. "I'm sorry, doctor." The surgeon continued walking without another word. Nearby, 2 young nurses exchanged sympathetic looks. One whispered, "I wish he'd stop talking to Mr. Hayes like that." The other sighed. "Dr. Mercer treats everyone that way." Samuel heard them. He simply smiled. People often apologized for things they hadn't done. Doctors carried enormous pressure. Pressure made people forget kindness. He had learned that lesson decades ago. As he continued mopping the hallway, a little girl no older than 7 slowly approached him. She held an IV pole almost taller than herself. "Good morning, Mr. Samuel." His face immediately softened. "Good morning, Princess." The little girl smiled. "Mom says today's my last chemotherapy." Samuel knelt despite the ache in his knees. "Then I suppose that deserves a celebration." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny folded paper crane. Every child in the oncology ward knew about Samuel's paper cranes. He folded a new one every single morning. The girl's eyes lit up. "It's blue, the strongest color." She hugged him tightly before carefully walking back toward her room. Samuel watched until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did he return to his mop. None of the surgeons noticed moments like these, but the children always did. And somehow, so did Luca Romano. Luca Romano had built an empire on one simple rule: never trust anyone. Not politicians, not business partners, not lawyers, certainly not doctors. Trust, in Luca's world, was more dangerous than any bullet. It was exactly that rule that had kept him alive for more than 20 years. And yet, when the sniper's bullet tore through his shoulder earlier that evening, the very first face that flashed across his mind wasn't one of his bodyguards. It wasn't his chief of security. It wasn't even one of the surgeons now fighting to save his life. It was the quiet old janitor who always worked the night shift. The same man most people never noticed. 3 days earlier, Luca had arrived at St. Gabriel Medical Center under a different name. Officially, he didn't exist. The hospital records identified him only as Mr. Lucas Reed, a wealthy businessman seeking a private medical evaluation. Only the hospital director and 2 security officers knew the truth. His annual examination always followed the same routine: 2 hours, private floor, no publicity, no visitors. His enemies had searched for years to discover where he received medical treatment. They never succeeded, or so everyone believed. While waiting outside the diagnostic suite, Luca stood beside the large glass windows overlooking the city. Rain covered Manhattan in silver. Traffic crawled below. For a rare moment, everything was quiet. Then, crash. A loud metallic sound echoed through the hallway. One of the housekeeping carts had struck a loose maintenance ladder. Buckets tipped over. Water spread across the polished floor. A young nurse sighed impatiently. "Oh, come on!" She hurried toward the spill. Before she could reach it, the old janitor was already kneeling. He wasn't cleaning the water. He was staring at the ceiling. His eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he looked directly at the nurse. "Don't step there." She frowned. "Why?" "The ceiling support is failing." Several nearby employees exchanged puzzled looks. One resident chuckled. "He's imagining things." The janitor didn't argue. Instead, he quietly picked up the fallen ladder and moved everyone several feet away. 5 seconds passed. Nothing happened. The young resident smirked. "I told you." Then, a deafening crack shattered the silence. A section of the suspended ceiling collapsed exactly where the nurse had been standing. Metal framework, broken pipes, concrete dust. Hundreds of pounds of debris crashed onto the floor. People screamed. The nurse froze. Her face turned white. If she had taken one more step, she would have been crushed. Security rushed forward. Doctors poured into the hallway. Everyone stared at the destruction. No one understood how the janitor had known. Samuel simply picked up his mop. "I reported that support beam 3 weeks ago." His voice remained calm. No one came. Without waiting for a reply, he continued walking down the hallway, as though predicting disasters was part of his daily routine. From the other end of the corridor, Luca watched everything, every second, every movement, every word. He wasn't impressed by luck. Luck didn't interest him. Observation did. Experience did. The old man's eyes hadn't wandered randomly toward the ceiling. They had moved with purpose. He had noticed something everyone else had missed. That wasn't coincidence. That was training. Years of it. Luca had spent decades reading people. It was one of the reasons he was still alive. Professional soldiers moved differently. Detectives noticed different things. Assassins never looked where ordinary people looked. And this janitor moved like none of them. He walked slowly, but every step was deliberate. Every glance measured. Every reflection in every window seemed to catch his attention. It reminded Luca of someone. Someone he hadn't seen in more than 25 years. Later that afternoon, inside the hospital cafeteria, Samuel sat alone with a cup of black coffee. He always chose the same corner table. Not because he disliked people, because he liked watching them. Doctors rushed through lunch in 6 minutes. Nurses shared stories from impossible shifts. Families waited for news they were afraid to hear. Hospitals revealed humanity at both its strongest and its weakest. As Samuel quietly folded another paper crane from a napkin, a shadow stopped beside his table. He looked up. Luca Romano. Without security, without assistance, without the expensive suit jacket, just a man. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Luca sat down across from him. "You knew the ceiling would fall." Samuel smiled faintly. "No, I knew it hadn't been repaired." Luca studied him. "You weren't surprised. I've learned that people usually ignore problems until those problems become emergencies." For the first time in many years, Luca found himself smiling. It lasted less than a second. "You've worked here long? 12 years? You like cleaning?" Samuel looked toward the busy hallway outside the cafeteria. "I like protecting people." The answer caught Luca completely off guard. Before he could ask another question, Samuel stood. "My break is over." He picked up his empty coffee cup, then looked directly into Luca's eyes. "Mr. Reed." Luca's heartbeat skipped. No one in this hospital should know that wasn't his real name. Samuel continued quietly. "You should postpone tomorrow night's meeting." Luca's expression hardened. "What meeting?" Samuel simply smiled. "The one that will end badly." Without another word, he walked away, leaving Luca frozen in his chair. Because tomorrow night, only 5 people in the entire world knew about that secret meeting. And Samuel Hayes wasn't supposed to be one of them. Luca Romano didn't move. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't calculating threats or escape routes. It was replaying a single sentence. "You should postpone tomorrow night's meeting." Samuel Hayes disappeared into the crowded hallway as calmly as if he had merely commented on the weather. Luca watched him until the old janitor turned a corner and vanished from sight. Only then did he realize something that sent a chill through him. Samuel had never asked if there was a meeting. He had spoken as if he already knew. "Boss?" Marco De Luca, Luca's longtime head of security, approached cautiously. "You all right?" Luca remained silent. "Cancel the rest of today's appointments." Marco frowned. "What happened?" Instead of answering, Luca looked toward the empty hallway. "Find everything you can on the janitor." "The old man?" "Everything." Marco nodded. "Name?" "Samuel Hayes." "I'll have a report within the hour." Luca shook his head. "No." Marco looked confused. "Don't use our people." "What?" "Use public records only." "Boss, why?" Luca lowered his voice. "If Samuel Hayes knows about tomorrow night's meeting, then I need to know whether someone is watching us." That evening, in a quiet apartment less than 2 miles from the hospital, Samuel unlocked his front door. The apartment was small. Simple, old furniture. Books stacked neatly against one wall. No television. No expensive decorations. Nothing about the place suggested mystery. He hung his worn hospital uniform beside the entrance, placed his keys in the same wooden bowl he had used for years, then walked toward a bookshelf. Instead of taking a book, he pressed gently against the back panel. Click. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside, no cash, no weapons, no gold, only a weathered leather notebook. Samuel opened it carefully. Hundreds of names filled its pages. Doctors, police officers, construction workers, firefighters, judges, nurses. Some names had dates beside them. Others had check marks. Several had been crossed out. Samuel stopped on one page. Luca Romano. There was only one sentence beneath the name. "Still alive. Doesn't know the truth." Samuel quietly closed the notebook. Outside, rain began falling again. Across Manhattan, inside the penthouse of Romano Shipping Corporation, a meeting was already underway. Marco entered carrying a thin folder. "I found almost nothing." Luca looked up. "What do you mean?" "Samuel Hayes." Marco opened the file. Age 70. Widower. No criminal record. No military record. No medical license. No engineering license. 12 years employed as a janitor. Before that. Marco paused. "There's almost nothing." Luca narrowed his eyes. "Nothing?" It's like he didn't exist. Tax records stop. Employment history disappears. No property. No interviews. No photographs. For almost 25 years, there's simply nothing. Silence filled the room. Marco finally asked, "Boss, should we be worried?" Luca answered without hesitation. Yes. The next afternoon, the secret meeting was scheduled to begin at exactly 8 p.m. Only 5 people knew the location. An abandoned wine warehouse on Pier 19. Every attendee had surrendered their phones. Every entrance had been secured. Every rooftop had been checked by snipers. It was impossible for outsiders to know. Or so everyone believed. At 7:42 p.m., Luca sat alone in the back of his armored SUV. His driver waited for instructions. Marco checked his watch. We're on schedule. Luca stared through the rain-covered window. Samuel's voice echoed once again. You should postpone tomorrow night's meeting. 5 long seconds passed. Then Luca spoke. Turn around. Marco looked up. Boss? We're leaving. What? The meeting is canceled. Marco couldn't hide his disbelief. People have flown in from 3 states. I know. They'll think it's disrespectful. I don't care. Marco leaned closer. With all due respect, we've never canceled one of these meetings. Luca slowly looked at him. Exactly. The convoy turned away from the warehouse. 3 black SUVs disappeared into the rain. 7 minutes later, the explosion could be heard nearly 2 miles away. A fireball erupted through the roof of the abandoned warehouse. Windows shattered across the pier. Steel beams twisted like paper. The entire building collapsed in less than 20 seconds. News helicopters arrived before firefighters. Police found no survivors. The explosives had been planted hours earlier, powerful enough to destroy the entire structure. Luca watched the breaking news from inside his penthouse. No one spoke. Marco slowly lowered the television volume. His face had turned pale. If we'd arrived on time, Luca finished the sentence. We'd all be dead. Silence. Then Marco whispered, how did he know? No one answered. The following morning, Samuel returned to work exactly as he always did. 4:45 a.m. Employee entrance. Clock in. Prepare the cleaning cart. Replace the mop heads. Nothing had changed. Or at least, that was how it appeared. As he pushed the cart toward the emergency department, he noticed someone standing beside the reception desk. Dr. Ethan Mercer. The trauma chief looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes. He hesitated before speaking. Mr. Hayes. Samuel smiled politely. Good morning, doctor. Mercer cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize. Samuel tilted his head. For what? For yesterday. I've been rude to you. For years. Samuel chuckled softly. You save lives. You've had difficult days. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. Mercer nodded. I'd like to buy you coffee sometime. Samuel smiled. I'd like that. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then, every light in the emergency department flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. A loud metallic bang echoed somewhere beneath the hospital. Doctors froze. Nurses looked toward the ceiling. Seconds later, every monitor in the intensive care unit suddenly went black. The backup generators failed to activate. An alarm unlike anything the staff had ever heard roared through the building. A mechanical voice echoed over the speakers. Critical infrastructure failure. Emergency power offline. Oxygen pressure dropping. People began shouting. Patients screamed. Ventilators stopped. Dr. Mercer sprinted toward the ICU. Move! Everybody move! Security rushed through the corridors. Someone yelled, Call engineering. Another voice shouted, The backup system isn't responding. Samuel didn't panic. He slowly looked toward the basement staircase. His expression changed for the first time. Very quietly, almost to himself, he whispered, They started earlier than I expected. Then he abandoned his cleaning cart and ran. The alarm echoed through every floor of St. Gabriel Medical Center. Doctors abandoned conversations mid-sentence. Visitors stood frozen. Patients looked around in confusion as emergency lights bathed the hallways in flashing crimson. Then came the announcement that no hospital ever wanted to hear: emergency oxygen pressure falling. Backup generators offline. Engineering response required immediately. For half a second, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Inside the intensive care unit, ventilators switched to battery power. Nurses rushed from bed to bed. Respiratory therapists grabbed portable oxygen cylinders. Dr. Ethan Mercer burst through the ICU doors. Manual ventilation. His voice thundered across the ward. Don't wait for engineering. Within seconds, dozens of medical staff were squeezing resuscitation bags by hand to keep critically ill patients alive. Every minute mattered. Every breath mattered. Meanwhile, Samuel Hayes was already halfway down the basement staircase. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't trying to understand what had happened. He already knew. Someone had attacked the hospital's infrastructure. Not randomly. Precisely. The lights, the generators, the oxygen system. Whoever planned this understood hospitals. Very well. Samuel pushed open the heavy maintenance door. A blast of humid air rushed toward him. Miles of steel pipes stretched through the dimly lit tunnel. Steam hissed from old valves. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. He walked faster, then faster still. His 70-year-old legs moved with surprising speed. He wasn't searching. He knew exactly where he was going. Above ground. The engineering office had descended into panic. We've lost Generator 2. Generator 3 won't start. The control system isn't responding. A young engineer slammed his fist onto the console. This doesn't make any sense. It was inspected last week. The chief engineer wiped sweat from his forehead. Check the fuel pumps. They're fine. Then check the transfer switch. We already did. Nothing explained why 3 independent backup systems had failed at exactly the same moment. Dr. Mercer stormed into the room. How long? Nobody answered. He shouted again. How long before oxygen runs out? The chief engineer swallowed hard. Maybe 12 minutes. Silence. Mercer stared at him. 12? If pressure keeps dropping. Less. Deep beneath the hospital, Samuel stopped beside a rusted steel door marked, Authorized Personnel Only. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old brass key. A key no current employee even knew existed. The lock clicked. The heavy door creaked open. Inside, rows of forgotten machinery filled the narrow chamber. Most had been disconnected years ago. Or so everyone believed. Samuel's flashlight swept slowly across the room. Nothing seemed out of place. Until he noticed it. A fresh boot print, still wet. Not even 10 minutes old. Someone had been here. Very recently. Samuel knelt beside the footprint. Large. Military-style sole. Not hospital-issued. His eyes hardened. They're inside. Back upstairs. Marco De Luca arrived with 6 armed bodyguards. Luca Romano followed only moments later, despite Dr. Mercer's protests. You should still be under observation. I'm leaving when this hospital is safe. Mercer shook his head. You've lost blood. I've survived worse. Marco leaned closer. Boss, this attack? You think it's connected? Luca answered without hesitation. It is. The warehouse failed, so they changed targets. Mercer looked between the 2 men. What are you talking about? Neither answered. Samuel moved deeper into the maintenance tunnels. Every instinct told him he was no longer alone. The silence felt wrong. Hospitals were never silent. Pipes vibrated. Machines hummed. Water flowed. Today, there was only stillness. Then, a faint metallic sound echoed behind him. Click. Samuel stopped walking. Someone had stepped on loose metal. He slowly turned off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. He listened. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Footsteps. Careful, professional. Closing in. Samuel smiled faintly. So, you finally found me. A voice emerged from the darkness. Older. Cold. Almost familiar. I wondered how long it would take. Samuel's smile disappeared. He knew that voice. But it couldn't be. The man speaking had supposedly died. 22 years ago. Samuel didn't move. The darkness swallowed the narrow maintenance tunnel, leaving only the distant hum of failing machinery somewhere deep beneath the hospital. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. The stranger stood just beyond the reach of the emergency lights. His face remained hidden. Only the outline of his shoulders could be seen through the drifting steam. Then, a faint laugh echoed through the tunnel. You've gotten old, Samuel. Samuel's jaw tightened. So have you, the man chuckled. But unlike you, I never retired. The silence that followed felt heavier than the concrete above them. Finally, Samuel took one careful step forward. I watched your funeral. You watched an empty coffin. Samuel's heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, from realization. Someone had spent more than 20 years convincing the world this man was dead. Someone with power. Someone patient. Above them, the hospital continued slipping deeper into chaos. Portable oxygen cylinders rolled through crowded hallways. Nurses shouted patient names. Families cried. Every minute without stable oxygen placed more lives at risk. Inside the engineering office, Dr. Ethan Mercer slammed another blueprint onto the table. There has to be another access route. The chief engineer shook his head. Those blueprints are outdated. They're from before the West Wing expansion. So where are the new ones? They disappeared years ago. Mercer stared at him. Disappeared? No one knows where they went. For the first time, Mercer felt something far worse than panic. Someone had prepared this. Meanwhile, Luca Romano stood beside the ICU window, watching doctors manually ventilate patients. His wound throbbed beneath fresh bandages. Marco approached quietly. Our people searched the warehouse. Luca didn't look away. And? They found traces of military-grade explosives. Not homemade. Professional. Luca nodded once. What about Samuel? Marco hesitated. Still in the basement. Doing what? We don't know. Luca finally turned. Find out. Deep underground, Samuel slowly removed his old flashlight from his belt. He didn't switch it on. The stranger smiled. Still relying on your ears. It kept me alive. It won't save you tonight. Samuel ignored the threat. Instead, he listened. Dripping water. Steam. The vibration of old pipes. And a second heartbeat. Not his. Someone else was down here. The stranger hadn't come alone. Samuel smiled almost imperceptibly. So, you brought backup. The laughter stopped. You always were difficult to surprise. Without warning, the emergency lights went out completely. Darkness. Absolute darkness. A metallic object struck the floor. Clang! Samuel instinctively stepped sideways. A knife buried itself in the concrete exactly where he had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Footsteps exploded through the tunnel. 2 attackers. Fast. Disciplined. Samuel ducked beneath the first swing. Instead of fighting, he ran. Not away from them, toward an older section of the tunnel. He knew these passages better than anyone alive. Sharp turns, low ceilings, hidden maintenance shafts. Places built decades before digital blueprints existed. The attackers followed. One shouted, "Cut him off!" The second disappeared through a side corridor. Samuel smiled. Exactly what he wanted. 30 seconds later, the lead attacker rounded a blind corner, then suddenly stopped. The tunnel ended. No Samuel, only silence. He frowned. Where did he? A heavy maintenance hatch slammed shut behind him. Metal bolts locked automatically. He was trapped. The second attacker rushed forward from another corridor. Where is he? No answer. Then, a calm voice echoed through the ventilation system. You should have studied the old layout. Samuel, somewhere above them. Invisible. The trapped men looked at each other. For the first time, they realized the old janitor hadn't been running. He had been leading them exactly where he wanted. Several floors above, an engineer suddenly shouted, "The backup generator just came online." Lights flickered. Some monitors restarted. Oxygen pressure began rising. Cheers erupted through the engineering office. Dr. Mercer exhaled for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes. Who fixed it? Nobody knew. Samuel quietly emerged from another maintenance stairwell nearly 100 yards away. His breathing remained steady. He looked down at his grease-covered hands, then reached into his pocket. Something cold rested against his fingers. He hadn't noticed it during the chase. It wasn't his. He pulled it into the light. A worn metal insignia, dust-covered, scratched. On the front, an engraved silver eagle surrounded by a laurel wreath. Samuel's expression changed instantly. No, he whispered. That unit was disbanded 30 years ago. If one of those insignias had appeared here tonight, then the attack on the hospital wasn't simply about Luca Romano. It was connected to something buried far deeper, something Samuel had spent decades trying to forget. The metal insignia felt heavier than it should have. Samuel stood alone in the empty maintenance hallway, staring at the silver eagle engraved into the worn piece of metal. For 30 years, he had tried to forget that symbol. For 30 years, he had convinced himself that the past was buried. But tonight, it had found him. Again. A distant alarm echoed through the hospital. Patients needed oxygen. Doctors needed answers. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was hunting him. Samuel slowly closed his hand around the insignia. Then he heard footsteps. Not rushed. Not afraid. Someone walking like they owned the entire building. Samuel slipped the insignia into his pocket and turned. Luca Romano stood at the end of the hallway. His face was pale from blood loss. But his eyes were sharp, watching, studying. You disappear into the basement during a hospital emergency, Luca said quietly. Then somehow the power returns. A pause. Should I believe that's a coincidence? Samuel looked at him. The two men stared at each other. For years, Samuel had learned how to read people. Fear, greed, anger, lies. But Luca Romano was different. The Mafia boss wasn't looking at him like a servant. He was looking at him like a mystery. "You should be resting," Samuel finally said. Luca almost smiled. "People usually tell me what to do after they stop being afraid of me. I was never afraid of you." That answer surprised Luca. Everyone feared his name. Everyone lowered their eyes when he entered a room. But this old janitor didn't even hesitate. "Who are you, Samuel?" Luca asked. The hallway became silent. Samuel looked away. "Someone who cleans floors." "No." Luca stepped closer. "Someone who cleans floors doesn't know how to restore a hospital's oxygen system. Someone who cleans floors doesn't move like a trained soldier. And someone who cleans floors doesn't recognize a military insignia from 30 years ago." Samuel's expression changed. Only for a second. But Luca noticed. He noticed everything. Before Samuel could answer, Marco appeared behind Luca. "Boss?" Luca turned. "What?" Marco looked uncomfortable. "We found something. Inside an abandoned storage room on the 3rd floor. The Mafia soldiers surrounded a table covered with evidence. Photos. Documents. Security footage." Marco placed a folder in front of Luca. "This was found inside the hospital server room." Luca opened it. His eyes narrowed. Inside were pictures. Old pictures. One showed a group of military doctors standing beside a battlefield hospital. Another showed a younger Samuel. But he wasn't wearing a janitor uniform. He was wearing a military medical jacket. Luca stared. "Where did you get this?" Marco answered. "The hospital database. But the file was hidden. Someone tried deleting it." Luca flipped through the pages. Then stopped. A name appeared. Samuel Hayes. Below it, Combat Medical Unit 17. Lead trauma surgeon. Officially deceased. 1996. Luca looked up slowly. "Deceased?" Marco nodded. "That's what the records say. But he's alive." The room went silent. Luca looked back at the picture. A younger Samuel stood beside soldiers. Calm. Focused. A man who looked nothing like the quiet janitor everyone ignored. "How many people know about this?" Marco shook his head. "Only us." Luca closed the folder. "Good. Keep it that way." Meanwhile, Samuel returned to the hospital basement. The place where nobody looked. The place where he had spent years hiding, behind an old maintenance panel. He removed a loose metal cover. Inside was a small hidden compartment. Not a weapon. Not money. Something much more dangerous. Memories. Samuel pulled out an old photograph. The edges were damaged. The colors had faded. It showed him standing beside a woman and a little girl. His daughter. The reason he disappeared. The reason he abandoned his old life. He touched the picture gently. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely audible. "I promised I would never go back." A sound interrupted him. A phone ringing. Samuel froze. Nobody had this number. Nobody. Slowly, he reached for the old phone hidden inside the compartment. The screen displayed one word. A name he hadn't seen in 30 years. Victor. Samuel's breathing stopped. Because Victor wasn't supposed to be alive. He answered. But he didn't speak. For several seconds, only silence. Then a familiar voice came through. "Older? Colder. You always were good at disappearing, Samuel." Samuel closed his eyes. "Victor." The voice laughed softly. "I heard you saved Luca Romano." Samuel said nothing. "You know what's funny?" Victor continued. "After all these years, you still can't stop saving people." Samuel's grip tightened around the phone. "What do you want?" A pause. Then Victor whispered, "The same thing I wanted 30 years ago. To finish what we started." Samuel's face changed, because he finally understood. The attack on Luca. The hospital sabotage. The missing blueprints. None of it was random. It was a message. A message meant specifically for him. "You brought me back into this," Samuel said. Victor answered calmly, "No. You were never out." The call ended. Upstairs, Luca stood in front of the hospital window, watching the city lights. Marco approached. "Boss." Luca didn't turn. "Tell me something." "Yes?" "Have you ever heard of Combat Medical Unit 17? Marco hesitated. "Only rumors." "What rumors?" Marco lowered his voice. "They said there was a doctor who saved impossible cases. Soldiers who should have died. Civilians caught in war zones. People called him..." Marco looked at the file. "The man who never lost a patient." Luca remained silent. Then he looked toward the hallway where Samuel had disappeared. For the first time in years, Luca Romano felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Not because Samuel was dangerous, not because he had a hidden past, but because after everything, the old man still chose to save strangers. A message appeared on Luca's phone. Unknown number. One sentence. Ask your janitor why he let your father die. Luca froze. His father. A memory he had buried. A death that had always felt wrong. Slowly, he looked back toward the basement stairs. Because suddenly, Samuel Hayes wasn't just connected to the hospital. He was connected to Luca's family, and the truth waiting underneath that building was far darker than anyone imagined. The message remained on Luca Romano's phone. Ask your janitor why he let your father die. 5 words. But they carried more weight than any threat Luca had ever received. For years, people had tried to kill him with bullets, with bombs, with betrayal. But nobody had ever attacked him with a memory. His father's death was the one thing Luca never questioned. Or at least, the one thing he pretended not to question. He remembered that night. The rain, the sirens, the hospital room, the doctors who refused to look him in the eyes, and the moment they told him, your father didn't make it. Luca was only 17, too young to understand politics, too young to understand the world his father lived in, but old enough to remember one detail, one person, a doctor standing outside the room. A man with tired eyes, a man who looked like he carried the weight of every life he had ever lost. Samuel Hayes. 30 years later, that same man was standing inside Luca's hospital, wearing a janitor uniform, pretending to be invisible. But Luca knew better now. Invisible people didn't save entire hospitals. Invisible people didn't recognize military symbols. Invisible people didn't have classified files. Luca walked through the empty hallway. His footsteps echoed. He found Samuel cleaning a window near the emergency department. The old man didn't turn around. You know it's rude to stare. Luca stopped. You knew my father. The cloth in Samuel's hand froze. Only for a moment. But Luca noticed. I knew many people. Don't lie to me. Samuel slowly turned. Their eyes met. For the first time, Luca wasn't looking at a servant. He was looking at someone from his past. What was his name? Samuel asked. Luca frowned. What? Your father. A strange question. Almost impossible. You know his name. Samuel looked away. I want to hear you say it. Silence. Then Luca answered. Antonio Romano. Samuel closed his eyes. And for a second, something painful crossed his face. Not fear, not guilt, regret. You really are his son. Luca's expression hardened. What does that mean? Samuel didn't answer, because suddenly, the hospital lights flickered. Again. The emergency alarms started screaming. Nurses rushed through the hallway. Doctors shouted. Security teams moved toward the ICU. Marco appeared beside Luca. Boss, what happened? The backup system is failing. Luca looked toward the ceiling. Again? Marco nodded. But this time, he lowered his voice. It's not a technical failure. Luca understood immediately. Someone was inside the hospital. Someone who wanted chaos. Deep inside the security room, a man wearing a hospital technician uniform watched the monitors. Every camera. Every hallway. Every movement. He smiled. 30 years later, and he's still protecting the wrong people. He typed a command. A file appeared on the screen. Project Echo, 1996. Below it, subject, Samuel Hayes. Status, missing. The man stared at the picture. Time to bring the ghost back. Meanwhile, Samuel entered the basement. But this time, Luca followed him. You shouldn't be here, Samuel said. Luca ignored him. You owe me answers. Samuel continued walking. You don't know what you're asking. I know my father died. Samuel stopped. And I know you were there. The old man's shoulders lowered slightly. For years, he had avoided this conversation, because some wounds didn't heal. They only became quieter. You think I killed your father? Luca didn't respond. That silence was enough. Samuel turned around. You really believe that? I believe someone knows the truth. Samuel looked at him. And you think that person is me? Before Luca could answer, a sound came from the darkness. A slow clap. Once, twice, 3 times. Both men turned. A figure stepped out from behind the old pipes. Victor, older, scarred, but alive. Samuel immediately moved in front of Luca, a protective instinct. The same instinct that had saved thousands. Victor smiled. Still protecting people. Even after everything they did to you. Samuel's face became cold. You should have stayed dead. Victor laughed. And you should have stayed a coward. Luca looked between them. You two know each other. Victor looked at Luca. Oh, not just me. He smiled. Your father knew him too. The silence became unbearable. Luca stepped forward. What happened in 1996? Victor looked at Samuel. Tell him. Samuel said nothing. Victor continued. Tell him how your father discovered the truth. Tell him why he had to die. Luca's eyes narrowed. What truth? Victor smiled. The truth about who really controlled the city. A long silence. Then Samuel finally spoke. Enough. Victor laughed. No. After 30 years. It's time everyone knew. He looked directly at Luca. Your father wasn't killed by enemies. He was killed by the people standing beside him. Luca froze. Because those words meant only one thing. The enemy wasn't outside. It was inside his own family. Suddenly, gunshots exploded through the basement. Bang, bang, bang. The lights shattered. Samuel grabbed Luca and pulled him behind a concrete pillar. Victor disappeared into the darkness. When the shooting stopped, only silence remained. Luca looked around. Victor was gone. But on the ground, there was something left behind. An old photograph. Luca picked it up. His hands froze. The picture showed 3 people. A young Samuel Hayes, Antonio Romano, and another man. A man Luca recognized instantly. Because he had seen that face his entire life. His uncle. The man who raised him. The man who controlled the Romano Empire after his father's death. On the back of the photograph, there was a handwritten sentence. Your father died because he trusted the wrong brother. Luca slowly looked at Samuel. For the first time, the Mafia boss who trusted nobody realized he might have spent his entire life hunting the wrong enemy. The photograph remained in Luca Romano's hand. A piece of paper, a faded image, a forgotten moment from 30 years ago. But somehow, it felt heavier than a gun. Because the man standing beside his father wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an enemy. He was family. Luca stared at the photograph again. His uncle, the man who had raised him after his father's death. The man who taught him how to survive. The man who told him, trust is weakness. For 30 years, Luca believed those words. Now he wondered, who had he really been protecting? Tell me everything. Luca's voice was quiet, but Samuel heard the anger beneath it. The basement was still filled with the smell of gunpowder. The echoes of bullets remained in the air. Samuel looked at the photograph, then at Luca. Some truths destroy the person who learns them. Luca stepped closer. I've spent my entire life surrounded by enemies. His eyes hardened. But I never imagined I was sitting at the same table with one. Samuel remained silent. Because he knew. Luca deserved the truth. But the truth had consequences. Your father, Samuel finally said, was not the man people believed he was. Luca frowned. What does that mean? Antonio Romano was a powerful man. Fear respected him. Money obeyed him. But deep down, Samuel paused. He wanted out. Luca looked confused. Out of what? Samuel looked toward the dark basement. The life he built. 30 years earlier, a war was happening beneath the surface of New York. Not between families. Not between gangs. Something bigger. Powerful businessmen. Corrupt officials. Crime organizations. All connected by one thing. Control. Samuel Hayes had been assigned to a military medical operation. His job was simple. Save lives. Nothing more. Until one night, a wounded man was brought into his emergency unit. Antonio Romano, the Mafia boss everyone feared. But Samuel saw something nobody else saw. A man who wasn't afraid of dying. A man who was afraid of what would happen after. Before losing consciousness, Antonio grabbed Samuel's arm. Doctor. Samuel leaned closer. Protect my son. Those were the last words he remembered. Back in the present, Luca looked at Samuel. My father asked you to protect me. Samuel nodded. But I failed. Luca's expression changed. Why? Samuel looked away. Because someone made sure I disappeared before I could keep that promise. The hospital suddenly went silent. Too silent. Samuel noticed immediately. Luca saw the change in his eyes. What? Samuel didn't answer. He listened. A habit from decades of survival. Footsteps. Too controlled. Too synchronized. Not doctors. Not security. Soldiers. Samuel whispered. We need to leave. Luca looked confused. Why? Samuel turned. Because whoever attacked this hospital isn't trying to kill you anymore. A pause. They're trying to erase everyone who knows the truth. 3 floors above, the hospital's security cameras turned black. One by one, a group of armed men moved through the hallway, not wearing masks, not hiding, because they didn't need to. They had access. They had authority. They had permission. The leader walked calmly, a familiar face. The hospital director. Dr. Richard Cole, the man who had welcomed Luca when he arrived. The man who had pretended to help. He removed his medical gloves. Find Samuel Hayes, one soldier asked. And Romano? Richard smiled. Leave him. The soldier looked surprised. Leave him. Richard nodded. Luca Romano needs to know the truth. Because once he knows, he will destroy his own empire for us. Meanwhile, Samuel and Luca moved through an old maintenance corridor, the same tunnels Samuel had used before. You knew this place existed, Luca said. Samuel continued walking. I built half of these emergency routes. Luca stopped. You built them? Samuel nodded. During a hospital reconstruction project. A pause. 30 years ago, Luca realized something. This hospital, Samuel looked at him, was not chosen randomly. The meaning hit him. The attack. The sabotage. The hidden files. Everything. It was planned. Because this hospital was connected to the past. They reached an old locked door. Samuel entered a code. The door opened. Inside was a hidden room. Not a storage room. A graveyard of memories. Old medical files. Photographs. Documents. Evidence. Luca looked around. What is this? Samuel answered quietly. The truth. He walked to an old cabinet. Opened it. Inside was a file. Written on the cover. Romano Incident. 1996. Luca reached for it. But before he could open it, a voice came from behind them. You really thought you could hide this forever? Both men turned. Dr. Richard Cole stood in the doorway, smiling. Samuel's face changed, because he finally understood. The hospital director wasn't just involved. He was one of them. You? Richard smiled. Hello, Samuel. 30 years later, and you're still trying to save people who don't deserve it. Luca stepped forward. Who are you working for? Richard looked at him, then laughed softly. The same person your father trusted. A pause. The same person who destroyed him. Luca's eyes narrowed. Who? Richard smiled, and said one name. Your uncle. Before Luca could react, the lights went out. Again, a gunshot exploded. But this time, the bullet wasn't meant for Luca. It was meant for Samuel. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the hidden room. For a moment, nobody moved. The darkness swallowed everything. Then emergency lights flickered back on. Luca opened his eyes. Samuel was still standing. But blood was dripping from his shoulder. He had moved. He had pushed Luca away. Again. Even after 30 years, Samuel Hayes was still doing the same thing, saving someone else. Luca stared at him. You knew. Samuel pressed his hand against the wound. Knew what? That they would come for you. A pause. You knew this would happen. Samuel looked down. No. His voice became quieter. I knew it was only a matter of time. Dr. Richard Cole disappeared when the lights returned. The soldiers were gone. The hidden room was empty. Almost. Except for the file left open on the table. Romano Incident, 1996. Luca looked at it. Then at Samuel. You knew my father. Samuel didn't answer. You knew he was trying to leave. Silence. You knew someone betrayed him. Another silence. Luca's voice became colder. Why didn't you tell me? Samuel looked at him. Because that was the question he had feared for 30 years. Because you were a child. Luca laughed bitterly. A child? I spent 30 years building an empire because I thought my father was murdered by enemies. Samuel lowered his eyes. You were 17. You lost everyone. Your mother was gone. Your father was dead. And the people around you. They used your pain. Luca's fists tightened. Who? Samuel looked at the file. Your uncle. Luca opened the folder. Inside were documents, reports, photos, financial records, everything Antonio Romano had collected before his death. The first page contained one sentence. The empire is being stolen from within. Luca continued reading. His expression slowly changed. His uncle hadn't simply inherited the Romano organization. He had manipulated it. He had removed anyone loyal to Antonio. He had rewritten history. And worst of all, he had convinced Luca that his father was weak. "Why did my father trust you?" Luca asked. Samuel looked at the old photograph. "Because your father knew something." "What?" "That power doesn't reveal someone's character." Samuel paused. "But losing power does." Luca looked confused. Samuel continued. "When Antonio Romano realized his own brother betrayed him, he didn't want revenge. He wanted to protect you." Luca looked away. That was the hardest part. Because deep inside, a part of him had always wanted to believe his father still cared. Suddenly, a sound came from the old computer in the room. A forgotten monitor turned on. Both men looked. A video file appeared. Created, October 17th, 1996. Samuel froze, because he knew that date, the last day he saw Antonio Romano alive. Luca pressed play. The screen showed his father, older, tired, sitting alone in an office. For several seconds, Antonio said nothing. Then he looked directly at the camera. "Luca." The room became silent. Even Samuel stopped breathing. "If you are watching this," Antonio continued, "then something went wrong." Luca stepped closer. His father's voice filled the room. "I know what my brother has done. I know he wants my position. But what he doesn't understand," Antonio looked down, "is that this life destroys everyone who touches it." Luca's eyes began to change. "Not anger. Pain." Antonio continued. "I spent my life building an empire because I thought power could protect my family. But I was wrong." A pause. "The only thing that can protect you is knowing who to trust." The video glitched. Then Antonio said something that made Samuel freeze. "Samuel Hayes is the only man I trust." Luca looked at Samuel. The old man's expression didn't change. But his eyes did. Antonio continued, "If anything happens to me, find Samuel. He knows the truth." The video stopped. Nobody spoke. For the first time, Luca understood. Samuel wasn't hiding because he was guilty. He was hiding because he was carrying a promise made to a dying man. Luca looked at him. "Why did you become a janitor?" Samuel looked at the floor. "Because doctors save bodies." A pause. "But sometimes, they can't save souls." Luca remained silent. Samuel continued. "After your father died, I saved hundreds of people, but I couldn't save the one person I promised to protect." Then suddenly, the computer screen turned back on. A new message appeared. Not from Richard. Not from Victor. Someone else. Someone higher. Only one sentence. "Samuel, you still haven't learned." A second line appeared. "Heroes always die first." Samuel's face changed, because he recognized the message. A code. A code used by only one person. The person who started everything. The person who ordered Antonio Romano's death. The person who had been hiding for 30 years. Samuel whispered, "No." Luca looked at him. "Who is it?" Samuel stared at the screen. And for the first time in decades, the legendary doctor who never lost a patient looked afraid. "Your father was not betrayed by your uncle." A pause. "He was betrayed by the man who taught your uncle everything." Luca's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Samuel slowly answered. "The founder of the entire organization. The man who created the Romano Empire." The screen displayed one final name. Vincent Romano. The name remained on the screen. Vincent Romano. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The room felt colder. Not because of the broken air conditioning. Not because of the darkness surrounding them. But because of what that name meant. Luca Romano had spent his entire life believing he understood his family. He believed his father was the beginning. He believed his uncle was the betrayal. He believed the past was buried. But now, he discovered something far worse. His family had secrets older than he was. "That's impossible," Luca finally whispered. Samuel looked at the screen. "No." His voice was quiet. "It's not." Luca turned toward him. "Vincent Romano died before my father." Samuel didn't answer. Because that was the lie everyone believed. A lie carefully created. A lie protected for 30 years. "Who was he?" Luca asked. Samuel looked at the old photograph. The man who built everything. 35 years earlier. Before Antonio Romano. Before Luca. Before the empire became feared across the city, there was Vincent Romano, a man who understood one simple truth. Fear was temporary, but loyalty was priceless. Vincent didn't build his organization through violence alone. He built it through relationships, politicians, business owners, lawyers, people who smiled in public, and controlled everything from the shadows. He created an empire where nobody knew who was truly in charge, except him. But Vincent had one weakness: his son, Antonio. Unlike his father, Antonio wanted something different. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted a normal life. He wanted his children to grow up without fear. And that was the beginning of the war. Not between enemies, between a father and a son. Back in the hidden room, Luca stared at Samuel. "You're telling me my grandfather was alive this entire time?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Yes. Then why hide?" Samuel looked away. Because Vincent Romano wasn't hiding from the world. A pause. The world was hiding from him. Suddenly, the old computer screen changed. A live video appeared. Static. Then, a man appeared. Older. Gray hair. Sharp eyes. But the same presence. The same authority. Even through a screen, everyone could feel it. Luca froze. Because he was looking at someone he had only seen in old photographs. Vincent Romano. The founder. The ghost. The man who should have been dead. "Hello, Luca." The voice was calm. Almost gentle. That made it more terrifying. Luca stepped closer. "You're alive." Vincent smiled. "Disappointed?" Luca's jaw tightened. "You destroyed my family." Vincent remained silent. Then he looked at Samuel. "No, I saved it." Samuel's expression changed. "Still lying after all these years?" Vincent smiled. "And you're still pretending you're the hero." The tension between them filled the room. Two men. Two survivors. Two people carrying 30 years of history. Luca looked between them. "You both know something I don't." Vincent nodded. "Your father was too weak." Luca's eyes hardened. "Don't talk about him," Vincent continued. "He loved you." A pause. "But love makes people careless." Samuel stepped forward. "Don't listen to him." Vincent ignored him. "Your father wanted to destroy everything I built. He wanted to walk away. He wanted to expose people who depended on our protection." Luca frowned. "Protection?" Vincent smiled. "You think this city runs on laws?" "No, it runs on balance." A pause. "Your father wanted to break that balance." Samuel looked at the screen. "Tell him the rest." Vincent's smile disappeared. For the first time, a crack appeared in his calm expression. Samuel continued. "Tell him why Antonio really died." Silence. Luca looked at Vincent. "Why?" The old man stared back, then slowly said, "Because your father found something he was never supposed to find." Luca waited. "What?" Vincent leaned closer to the camera. The organization wasn't the empire. The empire was only the mask. Samuel's expression became serious, because he knew. This was the truth buried for decades. Vincent continued. "There was someone above us. Someone above the Romano family. Someone who controlled governments, companies, crime organizations, everything." Luca frowned. "Who?" Vincent looked directly at him. "The people who created men like me." Suddenly, the video cut. The hidden room went dark. A loud explosion shook the hospital. Dust fell from the ceiling. The building trembled. Marco's voice came through Luca's radio. "Boss, we have a problem." Luca grabbed the radio. "What happened?" A pause. Then Marco answered, "The entire hospital has been surrounded." "By who?" Marco's voice became tense. "Not Mafia. Not police. Military." Samuel looked toward the ceiling. His face changed. Because this was not an attack. It was an extraction. Someone wasn't coming to kill them. Someone was coming to take them. And whoever was outside had more power than the Romano Empire ever had. Samuel whispered. "They finally came." Luca looked at him. "Who?" Samuel slowly answered. "The people who started the war." Outside the hospital, hundreds of vehicles surrounded the building. A man stepped out, wearing a black suit. No weapons, no guards, because he didn't need them. Every soldier moved aside when he walked forward. He looked at the hospital, then at the old building where Samuel was hiding, and smiled. 30 years. It's time to bring the doctor home. The hospital shook. The walls trembled. The lights flickered. And for the first time in 30 years, Samuel Hayes knew exactly who had arrived. Not because of the vehicles, not because of the soldiers, not because of their weapons, but because of the silence. People like them never needed to announce their presence. The world simply became quieter when they entered. Luca looked at Samuel. "You know them." Samuel didn't answer. "Samuel." The old man closed his eyes, then slowly nodded. "Yes. Who are they?" A long pause. Then Samuel said, "The people who decide which wars happen and which people disappear." Luca's expression hardened. "You mean the government?" Samuel shook his head. "No. Something older. Something hidden." Outside the hospital, the man in the black suit entered the main entrance. Every soldier immediately moved aside. The hospital staff froze. Doctors stopped walking. Nurses stopped speaking. Because they had never seen soldiers show respect to one person like this. The man looked around. Not impressed, not angry, just familiar, like he had been here before. 30 years ago, his name was Adrian Vale. To the public, he was a successful businessman, a philanthropist, a man whose name appeared on charity buildings and university donations. But behind closed doors, he was something else. The person who controlled the people who controlled others. The invisible hand. The man who never needed power, because power came to him. Inside the hidden room, the computer screen turned on again. A message appeared. Samuel Hayes. Time to finish the promise. Samuel stared at the words. Luca noticed. "Who is Adrian Vale?" Samuel remained silent. That answer told Luca everything. "You know him." Samuel looked at him. "I met him once." "When?" 1996. A pause. "The night your father died." Luca stepped back. "What?" Samuel looked at the old file. "Your father didn't die because of your uncle. Your uncle was only a piece. The real decision came from him. Adrian Vale. A memory returned. A destroyed battlefield hospital. Rain pouring. Sirens everywhere. Samuel was treating wounded soldiers when Antonio Romano arrived. Not as a mafia boss, as a desperate father. He carried documents, proof, evidence. He knew something dangerous. Antonio grabbed Samuel's hand. "If anything happens to me, do not let them find this." Samuel remembered asking, "Who are they?" Antonio looked toward the darkness, then whispered, "The people who own the world." Back in the present, a knock came from the other side of the hidden door. Everyone froze, because nobody knew the room existed, except someone who had been there before. The door slowly opened. Adrian Vale walked inside. No guards, no fear, just confidence. He looked at Samuel and smiled. "Dr. Hayes." Samuel's expression remained cold. "Adrian." Adrian looked older, but his eyes were unchanged. 30 years. "You disappeared well," Samuel replied. "Not well enough." Adrian laughed softly. "No, you were always easy to find." Luca stepped forward. "You killed my father." Adrian looked at him, studied him, then smiled. "You have Antonio's eyes." Luca's fists tightened. "Answer me." Adrian ignored the anger. "Your father was a good man." A pause. "That was his mistake." Samuel moved closer. "Why are you here?" Adrian looked around the room. "Because you opened the door." "I didn't." Adrian looked at Luca. "Yes, you did." Luca frowned. "What?" Adrian smiled. "Your father left a message. A message only his son could unlock." Samuel's face changed. Because he realized something. The video. The files. The hidden room. Everything. It wasn't just evidence. It was a test. Antonio had planned for this moment. Adrian walked toward the old computer. He touched the keyboard. A hidden file appeared. Romano final message. Luca stared. "How?" Adrian smiled. "Because your father knew one day you would come looking for the truth." The file opened. A video appeared. Antonio Romano. One final recording. But this time, he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was Samuel. And beside Samuel was a young Adrian Vale. Luca froze, because the enemy standing before him had once been his father's ally. Antonio's recorded voice began, "If you are watching this, then the three people who changed my life are in the same room." The video continued. "Samuel, Adrian, and my son Luca." Antonio looked directly at the camera. "One of these men betrayed me." The room became silent. Luca slowly turned, looking at both men, Samuel, Adrian. Then Antonio said, "But the truth is, the person who betrayed me was not the person you think." The video stopped. Black screen. One final sentence appeared. "Find the fourth man." Nobody moved. Because suddenly, everyone understood. There was another person, someone hidden, someone neither Samuel nor Adrian wanted to mention, someone who had been controlling the entire game. The screen went black. No sound. No movement. Only one sentence remained. Find the fourth man. Those 4 words destroyed everything Luca thought he knew, because for 30 years, he believed there were only 2 sides, his family and their enemies. But Antonio Romano had known the truth. The war was never between 2 sides. There had always been another player, watching, waiting, controlling everything from the shadows. Luca slowly turned toward Samuel. Who is he? Samuel didn't answer. That silence was enough. Luca stepped closer. You know? Samuel looked at the ground. Yes. Then tell me. The old man remained silent. For years, Samuel had carried the truth alone, not because he was protecting himself, because he was protecting Luca. But now, the boy he once promised to protect was no longer a child. He was a man standing in the middle of the storm. You really want to know? Luca's eyes hardened. I spent my entire life chasing a lie. A pause. I deserve the truth. Samuel walked toward the old cabinet. He removed another hidden file, different from the others, older, more damaged. On the cover was a name, Project Origin. Luca frowned. What is that? Samuel opened it. The beginning. Inside were photographs, documents, names. But one photo stopped Luca. A young man, standing beside Antonio Romano, beside Vincent Romano, beside Adrian Vale. A fourth person. Luca recognized him. Because he had seen him every day growing up, every family meeting, every important decision, every time the Romano Empire needed advice. No? Luca whispered. Samuel looked at him. Yes. The fourth man was not a stranger, not an enemy, not someone hiding in another country. He was someone who had been close to the family for decades, the family advisor, the man everyone trusted. Daniel Cross. Luca stared at the photograph. Impossible. Samuel shook his head. That's what everyone thought. Daniel was never the strongest, never the richest, never the most feared. But he understood something your family didn't. What? Samuel looked at him. People don't need to control an empire if they control the person sitting on the throne. A memory returned. Years ago, after Antonio's death, Daniel was the one who guided Luca. He told him who to trust, who to remove, who was dangerous, and Luca listened. Because Daniel was the only person who seemed to care, the only person who stayed. Now, that memory felt different. Suddenly, Adrian Vale laughed. Everyone looked at him. You finally found it. Luca turned. You knew? Adrian nodded. Of course. Then why didn't you tell me? Adrian looked at Samuel. Because your father asked us not to. Luca froze. Us? Samuel looked at Adrian. Adrian nodded. Antonio knew Daniel was dangerous. He knew Daniel was building his own empire, but he couldn't remove him. Why? Adrian's expression became serious. Because Daniel had already prepared everything. He controlled the police, the courts, the businesses, and even people inside your family. Luca felt anger rising. So, my whole life was manipulated? Nobody answered, because the answer was obvious. Suddenly, a phone rang. Everyone froze. The sound came from the old computer, a hidden communication channel. Samuel looked at the screen. Incoming call. Daniel Cross. Luca stared. The name appeared like a ghost. Answer it. Samuel looked at him. Luca, answer it. The call connected. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a familiar voice came through. Calm, polite, almost fatherly. Luca. The Mafia boss froze, because he knew that voice. The voice of the man who taught him everything. Daniel, why are you looking for answers you already know? Luca's breathing became heavier. You killed my father. Silence. Then Daniel sighed. No, I saved you from him. Luca's eyes narrowed. What? Daniel continued. Your father wanted to destroy everything. He wanted to expose people who would have destroyed you. He chose his ideals over his son. Samuel stepped closer. Don't listen to him. Daniel laughed softly. Still protecting him, Samuel? A pause. You never told Luca what really happened that night. Samuel's face changed. Because Daniel had touched the one wound he had buried. Luca noticed. What happened? No answer. Daniel continued. Ask Samuel why Antonio died in his arms. Silence. Luca turned slowly, looking at Samuel. The old man's expression became painful. Because Daniel wasn't lying. He was hiding something. Samuel, Luca whispered. What happened that night? The old doctor closed his eyes. 30 years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of guilt. Finally, he spoke. Your father didn't die because he was betrayed. A pause. He died because I made a choice. Everyone froze. Even Adrian. Because nobody expected those words. Samuel looked at Luca, and for the first time, the strongest man in the room looked broken. I had one chance to save your father, but I failed. The call remained open. Daniel smiled. Now you understand. Samuel Hayes isn't the hero you think he is. The screen went dark. Luca stood completely still. The man he trusted, the man his father trusted, the man who saved him countless times, was hiding the biggest secret of all.